guess let's dive into the episode. And for you guys who maybe you're watching for the first time, we like to do a brief recap as best we can. It's usually about 15 to 20 minutes long, where we kind of go over all the details from the episode that jumped out to us, all the important notes that happened. And then at the end of that 15 to 20 minutes, we'll dive into our reactions. And so we do cut out that recap as a separate video. So if you're watching just that right now, in the link below in the comments or the description, excuse me, is a link to the whole episode's discussion. But having said that, Will, do you want to start us out today?
Yes, sir. And, quick disclaimer, it wasn't like a long episode, but especially this first half was long for a first half, and it was jam-packed. So I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as possible, but you guys know how it goes.
I think it was a 4-hour episode, and the break happened at 3 hours.
Yeah.
So good luck.
Thanks. Okay, so this was episode 31 of Campaign 3 of Critical Role, and we don't have the title yet since we're recording this so early. But we pick up with Imogen having just seen the city on Ruidus through the telescope, and she's basically like exiting the telescope. And Ira asks, what did you see? And she lies, and she doesn't tell him about the city. She just mentions the lattice grid that she saw. Ira then takes a look himself, and you basically can like see him like being excited. So FCG casts detect thoughts on him and senses like this deep curiosity with the surface thoughts, and then tries to dive deeper, but is pushed back by these mental defenses that we know the Nightmare King to have when Imogen tried this earlier in the campaign. And FCG actually takes 7 psychic damage. They then ask Ira like, okay, what now? And he says, man, there's more to Ruidus than even I realized. He then goes back into the telescope and begins shifting it kind of all over the place, looking for something, finally landing somewhere, but not Ruidus. And he goes, there, I must watch their faces as they fail. And the party's like, wait, what? Like, whose faces? What are you talking about? And Imogen actually steps up, but she is blocked by this invisible wall. And they're like, hey, what's going on? Who do you want to watch fail? The Unseelie Court? And Ira says, they and their allies. And they're like, who are their allies? And Ira reveals a man named Ludinus as well as Odahan. Orm is aware of this name and reveals it to be the leader of the Cerberus Assembly. And at this point, Fern's like, well, I want to take a look too. Like, I'm the one that brought you this weave lens. And she steps up and is also blocked by this invisible wall. Ira then, creepily spider climbs up the machine and actually extracts the Moontide crown from it, puts it on his head, and is like, peace, I'm out. And they're like, wait, but he just disappears in like a flash of magic. When that happens, the invisible wall of force goes down, and they basically began to immediately start looking at the machine. And since they're worried about what might happen with the Moontide crown being removed, they decide to shut off all the power. And Orm and Fern actually go inside of it to see if they can retrieve the weave lens, to see if it's even still there. Meanwhile, Imogen tells everybody about the city that she saw on the moon, and Hondir is like, wait, what, a city? And she goes on to explain like the lattice she saw, and Hondir immediately goes to retrieve her book, flips it open, and is like, this? Did it look like this? And she's like, yeah, it looked exactly like that. And what he's showing her a picture of is the Divine Gate, like a representation of what that magic looked like. So they're like, what the heck does this mean? Orm does indeed find the weave lens, and it is intact, but it is deactive because it has already been used once today. Ashton's like, hey, can I see that? Orm tosses it to them, and Ashton immediately smacks it with their hammer, assuming that if it's still magical, it won't break.
Yeah.
It shatters. Everyone freaks out, but Laudna is able to use mending to put it back together.
I love how he was like, oh.
He's like, it seems okay, but they're not sure since it won't work today, even if it wasn't broken. So they're going to have to kind of wait and see if that actually is okay or not. The group then decides to look at what Ira may have left behind. And so they go through his things. They find a chest that Birdie lockpicks open, and inside is a bunch of things, some blank paper, a bunch of gems, some like dark charms and like mechanical pieces of things, and also a map of the Hellcatch Valley that kind of has some unique notes and supply lines on it. I think Treshy is one of the things that's denoted. Then they're basically sitting there being like, what do we do with this information? Like, what do we do from here? FCG suggests that they could get Dancer to come look at this machine, see what the Dancer could make of it. Orm explains a little bit more about who Ludinus Deleth is and how whatever is happening here goes to like the highest stations of power already. Laudna suggests they could use their newfound friends from the Paragon's Call to kind of team up with them, since they kind of now have this mutual enemy in the Nightmare King. And Hondir is like, I have to get this information to Eos. So the party also is like, yeah, we kind of need to get to Eos too. Maybe that's what we should do. Meanwhile, Ashton is wary of Birdie and Ollie still. He thinks that there's some holes in their timeline and kind of wants to get their story straight. So they once again kind of go through their timeline that we're already familiar with, about how they gave, Fern to Mori and got the crown, ran away, yada, yada, yada. And they've just been trying to figure out what's going on with Brutus ever since. It eventually boils down to Imogen and FCG deciding to joint mind meld with Ollie to dive into their memories and see what they can maybe uncover, if there are any holes in his memory. They do just that, and they actually find these like great swaths of grayed, murked out memories that have clearly either been messed with or removed. They try and pierce through one of these gray spots, but Ollie's nose starts to bleed like the more they press, and so they decide to pull back. So it's clear that there has been some manipulation here, and the specific memory that they did try to probe was of Birdie crying and seemingly the two of them like gathering their things to leave the Nightmare King. But then it gets kind of gray, and the next thing you know, like they're with the Nightmare King still, returning to a status quo. So seemingly he's manipulated them.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that's kind of a moment, and to kind of reset things, Fern's like, well, hey, I got you this music box that Chetney carved, and she gives them that, and they're, very thankful for that. And the party's like, okay, wait, do we need to get back to the Paragon's Call today? But there's this discussion because like FCG's at 2 hit points. A lot of them are very rough. They've only had a short rest since the whole encounter with you. They're looking kind of rough. So ultimately they decide they'll spend the night here and kind of regroup before heading back the next day. But before they head for bed to the night, they decide to look again to see if Ira maybe had any hidden stashes of anything anywhere. And Orem actually goes up to the top of the telescope and finds like these markings. So he calls Laudna up. Imogen actually casts Fly on her so that she can go up there. And she uses her Eyes of the Rune Keeper to see if she can like decisive. Sorry, what?
I said she's terrifying too.
Yeah, she always is. So she uses that to see what she can decipher about it, and realizes that these are like measurements and dates keeping track of Viridis's movements. The word curiosity is also written on a single stone, and it seems to line up with the telescope pointing in like east-northeastern directions. They kind of try to figure out what that might mean, but don't really land anywhere conclusive. So as they wind down, there's basically just a handful of conversations that happen. First, Imogen pulls Fern aside and asks her how she feels about everything with her parents, and it's okay if you're angry. And FCG almost immediately joins and is like, "Is there therapy going on here? Like, let me get in on this." And Fern's just saying like, "Yeah, you know what? I am mad at them." And FCG is like, "We used to talk to a doll to release our anger. It's like good to vent." Chetney like swings in. He's like, "Somebody say doll," and he hands them like a doll he'd handcrafted. And so she kind of vents, says that she is mad at her parents and, kind of has these bad thoughts. And they're like, that's normal. And Imogen's like, you know what? I kind of have some parental issues too. Like my mom's still alive. And FCG's like, yeah, me too. Like I have these issues with Dancer. And so everyone's having their parental issues. And they kind of feel slightly better after venting. But Fern decides to go pull her parents aside after this conversation. And she tells them herself that she's angry, and they understand, and they don't expect her forgiveness. They just, hope they have a chance to make it up to her. Orem then takes Imogen aside and basically kind of says, you're a natural leader. We need you. I'm here for you if you need to vent, if you need to lean on me. Like, I've got you. But he says, I have a favor to ask. And he asks her to look into his mind, detect his thoughts. And as she does, he imagines the voice of the Tempest, Keyleth. He's like, now that you know what she looks like, could you please send her a message for me? And he says, following threads: Dark Fae influence, members of the Cerberus Assembly, power players in Marquette, 1 month out from trouble, stay the course, missing home. The voice of the Tempest responds saying, "Thank you for your message, whoever you are. This is disconcerting news. Stay the course carefully. I'll pull the threads on my end. Stay safe." Orm thanks Imogen and she heads back inside, and then he takes out his sending stone and catches up with Dorian really quick, telling him he misses him and he's just checking in on him. Dorian responds, says things got a little weird, but he's doing okay. He misses you guys too. Don't die. Meanwhile, back inside, Ashton has gotten a little bit drunk, and he actually pulls that helmet out from the museum heist and kind of sits down on the floor and just stares at it as he's drinking until he falls asleep. FCG then goes outside to send a message to Dancer, and he says, "Dancer, fresh cut grass reporting in, awaiting designation and assignment. What is your current status?" There's a pause, and then there's like a gruff respond that is like, "How did you find me? Like, what do you want from me?" FCG doesn't respond to that, I think because they're out of spells, and goes to sleep. Finally, the last thing before they sleep is Fern goes and cuts down 2 of those purple gnarl rocks from the plant room, and Orm notices her do this. Everyone else is asleep. And she places one of them into Pate DeRollo's little dollhouse that Laudna keeps him in, and she puts the other one into Imogen's pocket. Then they all have a long rest, and that's where the first half ends.
Gosh, Fern, what is wrong with you? All right, so the second, great job, by the way, Will. That was a ton of stuff that you just got through really well.
Yeah, thanks. Hope it didn't take too long.
No, yeah. So in the second half, the party wakes up and they're like, "Yeah, let's get some tea. Let's enjoy the morning." And Laudna goes to retrieve pate and sashimi from their dollhouse, and is shocked to find this gnarl rock-like stone inside. Fern, in a very true chaotic self, is kind of like, didn't you want that? Like, aren't you excited about it? Not quite revealing that she's placed it in there. But Laudna immediately is seized by the voice of Delilah, who says, "Good," and sort of, it seems like is encouraging her to reach out towards it. Imogen immediately takes a cloth, grabs the stone, throws it, it shatters, and the light goes out from it. And Laudna's shook by this. In fact, she's so shook by it that she wants to get a breath of fresh air. She leaves the group, steps outside, and Delilah begins to speak to her and says basically that kind of the main point she says is that, hey, I'm the only one you can trust. Like, if something was to happen to you, I would be gone forever. So it seems like Delilah is actually anchored into Laudna. They have a conversation about the apogee solstice, and Delilah is basically like, I didn't have quite the time I wanted to really delve in, but it's going to be very exciting to see what happens over the next month. And pretty much cautions Laudna to stay careful, but if there's an opportunity, maybe she should dig in. Maybe she should indulge in the things that are happening, kind of making us wonder what Delilah has up her sleeve. Other than that, she comes back in, kind of shakes it off, and let's have our tea. Meanwhile, FCG is like, "Hey, I got a long rest. Let me reach back out to Dancer." So he reports back in. He says, "Dancer, it's me, fresh cut grass. Hey, I'm worried about you. Where are you? Like, can you tell me what's going on?" And there's that same pause. Dancer in that same gruff voice responds and says, "Leave me alone. I barely got away. You know what you did. I hope I never see you again." And then there's like this static, and Matt says to Sam, "You take 4 points." And there's this awesome moment where Imogen and everyone's just kind of like, 4 points of what?
What's
4
in the
points
box?
of what, Matt? And FCG is just like, he's writing down, he's tabulating, he goes, "That's really bad." And then he just goes limp. And the party's kind of like, "FCG, are you all right?" He's totally limp. Chetney then is like, "I know what will do the trick." He takes his chisel and just bam, hits FCG on the head. FCG whirls up with these blood red eyes, activates his buzzsaw, and slices into Chetney, casts spiritual weapon of a wood chipper, and attacks Chetney with that as well. Chetney just screams and freaks out. Um, and actually like yells at Chetney and says, shut your mouth. Like this very opposite personality from what we've been used to with FCG. And everyone rolls initiative. And it becomes this combat scene with FCG. Combat's being a bit generous. Laudna is the first to go, and she feels she hears the voice of Delilah that basically says, at the end of all things, all love will be taken. You'll have only yourself. And she casts Hunger of the Shard with a natural 20, nearly one-shots FCG, but does 50 points of damage, leaving him 6 points of health. And all of his joints begin to corrode. All of this oil and rust happening in his body. And just totally jacks him up, basically. Fern is next. Fern casts Heat Metal and does 15 points of damage, and gets a "How do you want to do this?" from Matt, but not before FCG screams at her and basically says, "Your parents hate you. They left you on purpose. They never wanted you." And he also screams to Laudna, "You were never alive," before going unconscious. And everyone's like, what just freaking happened? They actually tie him up. They lift him. He's dangling upside down. And they end up healing him to wake him back up. So he wakes back up, and FCG's dangling there, and he's kind of like, "Hey, smiley day, everybody, what's going on?" And they're like, "What do you remember just happened?" And he's like, "Oh, we just woke up, we were having tea," and doesn't have the memory at all of what happened. The party Imogen actually dives into his memories to try to see like what exactly did happen. And through this process realizes that the one-eyed monster that's been referenced a multitude of times, along with Ashton rolling a natural 20 on this, there's a connection there where they remember that FCG and finding him after the battle had an ocular unit that was damaged. He had only one eye, heavily implying that FCG seems to be the monster that killed the entirety of Dancer's troop. And there's also an interesting detail with the blades of grass across his chest. I think it's Orem notices that it could be blades of grass, or it could be the scars of a claw mark across his chest, maybe from one of his compatriots. So Imogen digs deeper, trying to find more information, and really all she finds are these both warm and sad memories that FCG has from all of his friends, things that they've said, like I love Laudna mentioning Whitestone Andy, but Imogen talking about having a thing with crowds, Chetney talking about how much he loved working with wood, and it's actually very vulnerable moments, like Sam Riegel actually wrote down verbatim these really great human comments that were made throughout the course of the campaign. And it's very oddly sweet moments. Orem basically is like, pretty much draws a line in the sand with his sword and says, like, guys, we have to get this together. Like, everyone is having, like, not only did we just have this with FCG, we had this with Chetney in his werewolf form in a previous encounter. We have Fern stealing from a bunch of people. Like, we gotta do better, because the stakes now are incredibly high. Like, we don't have room to basically not put all our cards on the table and act as one team. It was a very Lost, live together or die alone esque moment.
Yes.
But everyone's kind of like, yeah, like, we're in, let's do this. And even FCG offers to give up his buzzsaw and his grappling hook for safety's sake, for the party, for the party's safety, basically. Especially after the party's been like, hey, dude, you just went like full murder robot. And he's very concerned by this. The party tells him you can't contact Dancer again. But as an aside, Chetney and Imogen pretty much agree, like, we have to get a hold of Dancer. Like, we need to figure out what's going on. Where did he come from before he was purchased? Like, we need to get to the bottom of this. Also, another detail that happens as they kind of like get their tea, their coffee, whatever, Imogen pulls Laudna aside and is basically like, hey, are you okay? Like, that was kind of a crazy attack you had. And Imogen Laudna shares what Delilah said, that basically like her friends will betray her, like she'll be all by herself. And Laudna is especially shook by FCG saying like, you were never alive. And Imogen reassures her. She says, hey, you're alive regardless of the fact you don't have a pulse. And they're all going to get through this together. So the party has a lot to do. They need to head back to the Paragon's Call, but before they can, that is where our episode ends, and that is the end of episode 31 of Campaign 3 of Critical Role. So,
boom.
Woo!
Bada bing.
Click the link if you want to check our full discussion. Will, bro.
What an episode, dude.
What a crazy episode, man.
Yeah.